This is where my professional career began.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm Michael Hunter. What if from the time you were born, every decision you made or that was made for you was based on a lie, or more specifically, on bad information? Having no sound foundation to begin with, your life would necessarily become a series of wrong turns, poor choices, and regrets. The man we'll be speaking with today was born with a rare and misunderstood health condition, having some very challenging symptoms. That was bad enough. What made things worse was that until he was 19, his condition went undiagnosed, which led to years of false starts, wrong turns, catastrophic decisions, and lasting regrets. Stay with us on this journey of ultimate rebirth as he pulls himself up out of the ashes of his life to become an accomplished, brilliantly creative artist and a healthy man. Kenneth Jackson, welcome to My Healthy Mind.
Thanks for having me.
Ken, you are an incredibly talented and successful graphic artist working with well-known characters for Marvel Comics, yet you've come to this career in an unusual and convoluted manner. Why don't you start from the beginning for us?
Well, if I go to the beginning, I have to start with being born with a condition known as Kallmann syndrome.
Kallmann syndrome, I haven't heard of that.
Well, that's because it's a very rare endocrine disorder, which basically typically occurs in male-born individuals. The thing about Kallmann syndrome is that it's an endocrine disorder in which you have low testosterone, and when you have low testosterone, that can induce symptoms of depression. And so, growing up, because it was so rare, it went undiagnosed within me. So, when it first came around, when I was diagnosed with depression, nobody linked it to the Kallmann syndrome. Even though these things, people were, my mother and doctors were aware that I had some kind of endocrine disorder. They didn't link it to the depression.
So it took them a while to figure out what was wrong?
Yeah, it took years and years. And eventually I wasn't even diagnosed until I myself, at the age of 19, went to an endocrinologist, and they ran tests and they came up with that diagnosis. Seeing as it was a rare condition, I was looking for a lot of answers, and I developed, several different delusions to try to explain what I was going through.
And are delusions typically a symptom of Kallmann syndrome?
Not typically, but again, when you're not, when you don't have really a lot of answers, you kind of do what humans do and you make stuff up.
Talk to me a little bit more about growing up with your disorder and your childhood.
I was born into a single parent household, and when I was born, my mother almost died because she had toxemia. So there was something there that kind of bonded us, but we stuck together. And what I did growing up was, since I was by myself, I'm an only child, I spent my time reading, at first just the funny pages in the newspaper, and then comic books, and making up stories for the action figures that I got, and also exploring science. I was always into zoology in particular. So the natural, both literature and science combined in me to just give me a thirst for knowledge. And throughout my whole life, I just wanted to understand the natural world around me, and part of that included understanding myself.
And you were misdiagnosed by the treatment that your mom attempted to get for you, correct?
Yes. It was, everybody just thought that it was depression and it didn't have anything to do with an endocrine disorder. So between the, the, the delusions that I was having and also just what the counselors and social workers were saying. They thought, depression was it and that Paxil was the answer.
And as you struggled with the treatment, what happened next?
I was suicidal for a while and for a long time. I did, if I wasn't trying to do that, I was self-mutilating. And I ran into just a long road, whether you want to talk about cutting myself or drugs or alcohol or just living like very recklessly, because I was angry too.
And part of the treatment was hormone therapy.
Yes, that was actually the main part of the treatment, because puberty happens usually, when you're in middle school and high school and stuff, but that wasn't happening for me, although that was happening for the people around me. I was kind of stuck in one way, for, you can say 6 years, you can maybe even say 10 years, not developing while other people were developing. And so that when I got into college was when it started for me, because that's when the hormone replacement therapy started, and that's how I could actually start developing. I was getting hormone replacement therapy for a while, but my mother, she stopped taking me because, again, there wasn't a lot of information out there to tell her that she was doing the right thing. This was more of an experimental procedure. Plus, she had a lot of pressure because, again, she was a single parent and she had to work too. So I just wound up not getting the hormone replacement therapy for those years, and I was being treated for depression.
And what happened in your life next when you were 19?
I was in college. I think I was entering my junior year, and I wasn't doing, I had very poor grades, again, due to the mental illness that developed from growing up with this endocrine disorder and not having the treatment when I was supposed to. So I spent a lot of times just in the street, doing street stuff, and I was okay with that for a while. But I still noticed that I wasn't like everyone else, and I was aware of this problem, this mutation, whatever you want to call it, and that I could get treatment for that now that I was in a place where I could advocate for myself.
So you constantly knew that something was wrong, and so you weren't settled with it not being addressed properly, and so you continued to seek that for yourself.
Yes.
And if you were doing that while you were in the streets, what was that dynamic like? And because you got the streets, college, and this mental health issue that you were struggling with.
Imagine like boarding school for criminals. I was being raised by that culture and taught, not taught really to be a danger to society, but taught how to survive in society, how to make money, how to make friends, how to stay out of trouble, how to focus. And because people, they did, make sure I stayed on the right track and stayed out of, some of the worst elements of that lifestyle.
And you started your artistic career in college too, correct? Looking for your
Yes.
internships. Talk about that.
Again, the time when it really, really spoke to me was a good friend of mine's spot just got raided, really, and I was there. And I had already scheduled an interview with Marvel, and we were coming back into the apartment, and that's when the cops, got both of us. They took him, but they let me go. And when he told me the story about what happened when they took him back into his apartment, he said that the officer saw a sketch that I did for him that said, "This pot keeps me grounded," like a double entendre with triple, if you consider a visual language. But and the cop said that it was good work, and that was one of the things that influenced the police officers to, just stay off of me. And so that's when it really started. And it developed at New York Comic Con, where it was official during my first interview when the co-creator of Captain America, Joe Simon, looked through my sketchbook, and long story short, he's like, "Oh, nice work, kid. The only name that belongs in these books is yours." And Joe Simon, of course, he was the writer of Captain America. Jack Kirby was the illustrator, but they worked together. Jack Kirby passed away in the 90s, but Joe Simon lived into his 90s. And while he wasn't an artist, he felt that I had talent.
And so talk to me about City Hair and what else you did artistically during that college time.
Well, while I was interning for Marvel, I didn't have a TV or a radio in my room in Washington Heights, so I went to the library where I studied, underground comics, like cartoonists like Art Spiegelman and Robert Crumb, and independent sequential artists, the Godfather, Will Eisner, right? And that showed me that I could do comics my way. They didn't have to necessarily be the Marvel way. And so that's when I developed City Hair, which is me reclaiming an Afro-Indigenous folk hero, Burr Rabbit, and channeling what our people are commonly going through today through this character.
Next time you need to see a doctor, don't go to a doctor. Call Team Wellness Online. With Team Wellness Online, you can see a doctor or a therapist without waiting, usually within 24 hours. Your televisit is private and 100% secure, and you can take all the time you want. So next time you need to see a doctor or therapist, call Team Wellness Online at 888-813-TEAM to make a virtual appointment, and we'll come to you.
So you have these wonderful avenues, and you're looking over your shoulder and you're seeing that you have some potential, yet eventually you did get in trouble with the law.
Yeah, eventually everything caught up with me.
And talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
It's hard to talk about that without explaining like the lack of access to proper treatment, because once I got to an age where I was no longer on my parents' health insurance, I was responsible for getting the hormone replacement therapy and paying for that medication, which was very expensive. It got to a point where it was $700 a month for the testosterone that I needed. So, I was still working, regular 9-to-5 jobs. I would work anywhere between 69 and 100-hour weeks. I wound up having issues at work and with the manager, and instead of reacting violently like I wanted to, I just walked off the job. I walked 40 miles from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Harrisburg, and they found me, sleeping behind some bushes. I reacted very violently to that, and the police officer who eventually showed up, rather than put me in jail, he put me in a psychiatric institute where I wound up staying there for 18 days.
And what happened in that 18 days?
It took me a while to calm down. I would have been out earlier, but, they gave me crayons that drew all over the walls. Eventually they gave me, when they found me, I had, some of my art supplies with me, some Bristol board and ink. So eventually they gave me my art supplies back. But I started to calm down once they told me that the more I acted out, the longer I would be staying there. And eventually, after the 18 days, when they put me on the medication, both my medications that I was supposed to have now, because they had diagnosed me with psychosis at that time, they gave me a ticket to go back to Lancaster, and I took it. Got another job and just worked until it was time for me to leave for California.
And did you remain on the medication after the hospital?
For a little while, and then I just stopped taking it.
And so you chose to stop taking it.
Yes, I stayed on the testosterone, but not the psychoactive medication.
And what was it like when you stopped taking medication and you're headed to California?
No, it was very surreal because, those delusions that I had developed back in the day, they were still there. So I felt like I was kind of being led by divine providence to do what I was doing. I was seeing symbols and signs and messages from everywhere telling me, when to go left and when to go right and when to keep straight or go up and down. And that pretty much what was directing me while I was in California. I also didn't believe that I was schizophrenic or had psychosis. So the psychoactive medication they put me on, I didn't want any part of it.
So how did things go for you being off the medication and out of treatment too?
For a while they were okay. Like I didn't threaten anybody. I didn't hurt anybody. I pretty much was still making art. I was able to function. I had a job, and the only reason I quit that job was so that I could move to California to get a better job. So things were okay for a while.
So how did you end up in jail?
I wound up in jail because I pulled a knife on a caseworker, and of course, she started screaming. They called the cops.
So what led up to the knife?
Basically, I was a poll worker and was having issues with another poll worker and other homeless people who were racist. They were hyped up about the 2016 election. It was Clinton Trump. So I was being harassed by them a lot. And one particular day, after I had lost that job that I had, I was waiting for my unemployment card. It didn't show up. I typically receive the wrong person's mail, but I would let the clerks know or the people at the desk know, and that would be that. But I thought that maybe someone may have received my unemployment card by accident, but not taken the same approach that I did and let it be known. I thought that maybe they may have kept it because, again, they had issues with me. So when I tried to bring this up to the caseworker, her response I felt was very insensitive, and in the way I perceived it, it supported the idea that she was just an accomplice in my oppression. So I reacted violently, and I pulled the knife on her. I didn't cut her, I didn't touch her really, but it was enough to scare her. I just wanted to show that I was serious about it, but I wanted to do it without hurting people, and I had other ways that I thought about getting that point across, and that was the one that I felt was where I would get the least amount of, damage or consequences.
And the consequences ended up being?
It resulted in incarceration. And the way LA County Jail works is, the regular inmates, they get put in like the general population, or what they call the main line. But in my case, since I had already been diagnosed with a mental illness, and I was able to advocate for that when they did lock me up, they put me in the Department of Mental Health section of the jail. So that's where people who had drug addictions or mental illnesses were housed.
So you were now in jail and in treatment, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
So they finally got it right while you're in jail, not in a psychiatric hospital, in jail.
Yeah.
With mental health, as with physical health, getting the proper diagnosis is so important and sometimes so difficult because it's the first step toward getting the proper treatment. An incorrect diagnosis and the resulting treatment can at best do nothing to help, and at worst, cause catastrophic consequences, including death. Getting the correct diagnosis can be very tricky. You need to trust your own instincts and gather as much information and as many clinical opinions as you can. Then, be proactive in any decisions and treatments that are being made for you. As time goes on, regularly stay in tune with your body and note your progress. If at any point you feel that your treatment or diagnosis should be modified, speak up. Don't simply go off your treatment altogether. As your condition improves or your symptoms change over time, you should expect to update your treatment. It's often helpful to remain with the same practitioners throughout your treatment in order to facilitate continuity of care and stay healthy.
So tell me what happened afterwards.
They kept me on this medication. I was in jail for 10 months, but my public defender saved me from 5 years in prison and got me a year in a psychiatric facility instead, where, I stayed there. That's where I was sentenced. I had to plead no contest. And I stayed there, and I was on my best behavior. I really didn't get into any trouble. I really wasn't abused at all by the corrections officers or the staff. They were really good to me, and I showed them the same respect that they showed me, and they never had an issue out of me. Of course, when you go to jail, you don't have money. The average person doesn't have money in there to work with, not behind bars. And so I started drawing for other inmates and myself. I was drawing on the walls. I was drawing little pictures of flowers that other inmates could send home to their loved ones.
How did you come out of that? So transition us from the psychiatric hospital, you're starting to rekindle your art, and to where you are now.
Right away after they released me, I stayed at what they call a board and care. And I was in Van Nuys. So, when I was incarcerated previously, I had been taking classes at the Animation Guild. And I went back to the Animation Guild once I was released to continue taking more classes. I just knew that at that point, art was what I was going to do.
Anxiety, depression can happen to anyone for all kinds of reasons, especially during difficult and trying times that no one should have to go through alone. At Team Wellness, trained, compassionate, caring professionals will get you into the right treatment so you get better. Team Wellness, you are not alone.
Ken, once you were back out into the world, so to speak, what happened?
My case got transferred to Detroit, and I wound up relocating back home, but that took me away from the Animation Guild, so I went to the Scarab Club to start doing the figure drawing sessions, and I got in really good there, start volunteering in their garden, tried to figure out how to really put my life together, so I got into a Inmates to Entrepreneurs program also, and started developing my own business as an artist, but also went to Wayne State to get my degree, my master's in English literature. So I did that and maintained a 4.0 and connected with other muralists, another muralist, Dennis Orlowski, and also recently Hubert Massey. And they've been mentoring me as a muralist now, because I've got like 6, maybe 7 murals up, and I've been in a handful of exhibitions in the Detroit area, and I have my second solo exhibition in Michigan coming up in May. And I also started an internship with Lucha Comics, so I've been working with them as well.
And are you still in treatment?
I still have a therapist. I still take my medication, but they now that I've stabilized, they're talking about just, decreasing my medication because they feel like I'm handling just recovery very well.
Well, Ken, yours is a long and circuitous journey, and it's filled with good information, good decisions, bad decisions, yet it all has a happy ending. Why do you think that is?
I learned from the people around me and from treatment that the important thing is to just focus on your ground and do the work, and that everything else will fall into place. The term carpe diem, people take as seize the day and do whatever you want, but it really means use your time. So I take that and I think of how to get the best juice out of every minute of the hour.
If you're having any kind of mental health crisis, we can help. At Team Wellness Crisis Centers, you'll be seen immediately, stabilized in our own private facility, and given all the care you need to get better. Don't wait. Call the Team Wellness Helpline at 1-888-813-TEAM. It could be your lifeline.
Thank you for staying with us today through all the twists and turns of one man's remarkable journey. If you'd like to learn more about this or any mental health issue, visit us on our website at myhealthymind.com, on Facebook at My Healthy Mind Show, or on Twitter. If you missed any of our past episodes, you can view them on YouTube. You'll find a complete list on our website. And as you follow us on Facebook and Twitter, please feel free to comment and to suggest ideas for new shows. We'll see you next week for another edition of My Healthy Mind. Let's talk about it. Be sure to like and subscribe for more episodes of My Healthy Mind.